Very excited. Returning to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast, and one of my favorite YouTube shows, and it does such a great job. Joe, the lawyer from the Common Sense Academy. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Brad. Thanks for having me on. Lots been going on in my world of sovereign citizens and law, etc. But I think we're here to talk about a specific topic. Is that correct?
That is correct. But first, it always tastes better when we sip together. So let's have a mutual sip.
Let's do it. Let's
All
do it.
right,
Raise your
clink.
cup. Cheers.
Cheers. What are you drinking?
Chocolate milk.
Oh, nice. I am drinking a gin and tonic uh, with aviation gin, so I'm hoping that Ryan Reynolds catches word of this and wants to like be on the show.
I hope so too, Brad. You got an adult drink, and I have a child's drink, but
Yeah. So yeah, I reached out to you because Bill Cosby is out of jail,
yeah.
and I didn't have that on my 2021 bingo card.
I don't think anyone did.
Yeah, it was just. And I'm not a lawyer. Listen, my legal expertise comes from I read a bunch of Grisham novels, and I'm a fan of The Good Fight. Um, so I don't pretend to have any expertise on this. Um, but whenever there's a big celebrity trial that ends up with the person in jail, as rare as that happens,
Sure.
um, yeah,
Sure.
there's always every 3 to 6 months there's some story about OJ is trying to get his conviction overturned, or Phil Spector up until his death was always, and he would have his little. They always have their like vocal group of supporters. It was like, oh, this is going to be the one that gets him out. This is going to be one, and it never happens because there's so many avenues to take to be exhausted, asking for a new trial, asking for whatever it is. So they would always talk about Cosby trying to get his conviction overturned, but I never thought it would happen. And then just one day, it's like, yeah, he's out. I was like, what happened? And you're a lawyer, and you're a Pennsylvania lawyer. This all happened in PA.
hmm
So I wanted to ask you about your take on this because it seems mad, but it does seem like this is something that so many wheels were set in motion years and years, if not a decade plus ago, and it all came out and shook out in his favor. So I really wanted your take on this.
Sure. Sure. Do you want to do a quick summary, Brad, of what happened so that everybody kind of understands, and then I can like give you an opinion, and we can sort of go from there.
Yeah, please, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, so first of all, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, um, and I did not read the opinion, but I've actually done a decent amount of this work, and I may get a couple of facts here and there wrong, but I definitely understand overall what happened. Okay, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Bill Cosby's conviction and said he cannot be tried again on this case. Okay, so usually, like you said, a lot of times what defendants in that situation are looking for is to get a new trial, get a second bite at the apple, because they will say, well, something was unfair about my trial. This went wrong or that went wrong. Therefore, my trial was unfair, so I need a new trial. But the PA Supreme Court here, Pennsylvania Supreme Court said that's not applicable here. That would not be a remedy. The only possible remedy here is for the conviction to be overturned and for Cosby more or less to go free, and he cannot be tried again on this case. That's I don't know exactly how they stated it, but that's what happened. Um, Now the reason, again, I'm going to do this sort of quick and dirty, is the reason is back in, and again, I can't remember all the dates, but let's start here. This woman, this trial that Bill Cosby was convicted on was for a sexual assault on a single woman. A single woman, right? And we, everybody in the media, us as media consumers, we think, oh, Bill Cosby, he did it to 50 or 60 women. Yeah, there's allegations out there for 50 or 60 women. Okay. But what's happened is some of those were in the 1980s, maybe even the 1970s. 1990s, early 2000s. So by the time that this came to light, which was, I believe, like 5 or 6 years ago when things started really boiling over for him, the statute of limitations had ran on most of those women. So there was only, well, I don't want to say that. I've heard that there are a couple other women out there with allegations whose statute of limitations have not run. So this may not be over. They may go after him with a different victim, but that would be a completely different case. Okay.
To be starting from the beginning all over again.
Correct, correct. I mean, if you commit 5 crimes against 5 different people, that's 5 different cases. Okay. It's possible in certain situations, depending on the facts, that could all be taken care of in a single trial, but that wasn't the case here. One trial, okay, against one with an allegation of one woman. All right. So this particular woman, I believe her name is Andrea Constand. This particular woman, back in 2015, when these allegations came to light, there was a civil lawsuit. She had a civil lawsuit, and she was also in touch with the district attorney, who is the prosecutor in Montgomery County, which is in Pennsylvania, right? Montgomery County. I'm in Pittsburgh, PA, which is on the western part of the state. Bill Cosby's from the Philadelphia area. Montgomery is like right outside Philadelphia County.
Yeah, I
So
used to spend a little bit of time in Monco. There was a very good community college there where I would take some night classes to help get my degree a little earlier than I would have otherwise. So yeah, I actually know that area. I spent a lot of time there, so it's weird just hearing that. Like this is where so much of this craziness centers from.
yeah, it is bizarre when you're where you've been or where you're from becomes the center of some national attention. So that's where the I guess, and again, don't quote me on everything, but that is where the assault would have taken place, because that's where a trial is going to be held for a crime, is that most of the time the physical location where the assault took place. I believe Cosby lived there, so that's where the assault allegedly took place. So this woman, Andrea Constant, comes forward, and don't quote me, I could be wrong on these dates. I didn't, sorry, I was a little rushed today. I didn't pull everything up. Around 2015, several years ago, before the trial, that's all that really matters, is she comes forward with these allegations, and she starts a civil case against Bill Cosby. And she's also talking to the prosecutor, the district attorney of Montgomery County, Bruce Castor, about a possible criminal case. So she put these allegations forward. She's got a civil attorney. I believe they had already filed suit. And she's also talking to the district attorney about pursuing him criminally.
Joe,
Well,
how common is that to file to basically try to file a civil case the same time you're doing a criminal case? I imagine that's most most frequent when it's you have they're accusing someone of means, and possibly because the way the judicial system and works is like it's going to be a lot easier to get them for money than it would be necessarily to get them put away because yeah, and you can speak to this a lot better than I can. It's not always the same justice system for people who aren't rich.
yeah, yeah, that's true. And you kind of you nailed it there when you said people of means. And let me stress this as well. If and I'll go back to the question, but you said it's not the same justice system for people with money and people who don't have money. But it's also important to understand a civil case and a criminal case are actually very different. And so the burden of proof in the criminal case. Everybody's familiar if to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. So the prosecutor has to have, doesn't actually have to, but the law says we're beyond a reasonable doubt, which is, we can't say this in court, but I talk about this sometimes, is you 80% certainty, right? You have to, the jury has to be sitting there and say, look, we think that the allegations are true, at least, 80%, if you had to put a percentage on it. Okay. Like, we're that sure. How sure are you? Well, I'm 80% sure. Okay. Then convict the person. That's reasonable doubt. But in civil court, it's called a preponderance of the evidence, which is literally 51%. The language used in the court system is more likely than not. That's a much lower burden of proof. Much so, you went from 80% in criminal to 51% in civil. Okay, so
Sort of like the difference between definitely and probably.
yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yep. But that's pretty big difference too, right? It was pretty big. Yeah, that's a good way to state it, Brad. So, and how common this is? Well, it depends. Number one, like you said, is a victim of a crime going to sue somebody who is very poor or doesn't have means? Probably not. Mostly because a lawyer's not going to be interested in that case. Okay, and they're not going to pay a lawyer $1,000 to sue somebody, or $10,000 or $20,000 to sue somebody where you'll never get a penny of that money back. So you're not, attorneys are going to, most of the time, petty sort of assaults, things like that. A lawyer is going to be like, no, no, no. Now, if it was a person of means, that's a different story, right? The attorney's going to be interested because they know if we nail that guy or girl with a judgment, we're going to be able to enforce it. They got millions of dollars, real estate, assets, etc. So yeah, that's why a lot of these big stars are sometimes able to make even criminal actions go away, because if they give the victim an overwhelming amount of money, all right, the victim's gonna zip it up and that's it. Okay. So the way it usually goes, though, is there will be a criminal case, and these are for certain crimes only, but yeah, sexual assault and assault type crimes, right? There will be a criminal case. Most of the time, the attorneys involved are going to want to see the criminal case play out and then see if the defendant, the person accused of the bad act, is convicted. And if they're convicted, it's open and shut for the civil case. Then you start to think about the civil case, and then you say, well, is it worth filing suit, etc. So that's sort of the norm. That's how most attorneys do things, but every situation is different. My understanding here is that she was sort of pursuing both of them at the same time, or had already started the civil action, which, to be perfectly honest, I don't think that's the way to go. However, if you're dealing with someone like Bill Cosby, you have more bargaining leverage if you file the civil suit and then, I hate to say it, ladies, and then you dangle the criminal case over his head, right? Look, listen, Mr. Cosby, we're already coming at you with a civil suit. We're also going to come at you with a criminal suit. Give us X amount of dollars. Okay. That's kind of what happened here. All right. This woman, and I'll get to it, is she in a way, and I'm not saying that she meant it to be this way, because there's a lot of people involved in these decisions and a lot of lawyers involved, and lawyers can influence what happens greatly with the victim. The victim may not even fully understand the rights that she's giving up. So this case here, and some of these details may be off, but the general push is correct. She's thinking about, or has already started, a civil case. She's thinking about a criminal case, which has not been started. Her attorneys, her lawyers, are in touch with the prosecuting attorney in Montgomery County, Bruce Castor. Bruce Castor is in touch with Bill Cosby and his lawyers. Okay, so all the lawyers are in communication. And what happens is Bruce Castor, from discussions with her lawyers, okay, talks to Bill Cosby's lawyers and says, look, if you testify in a civil deposition, okay, we will not pursue criminal charges in this case. Now, there's some question here about whether he really made a promise there, but there were discussions, and then he also made a public statement. I could pull it up and look at the exact language. He also made public statements that they were not going to pursue the case because Bill Cosby was going to testify in the civil case. And what the victim gained from that agreement, and Bill Cosby's attorneys agreed, was her civil case became much, much stronger. And they had the deposition, and Bill Cosby uh, more or less admitted to criminal conduct in that interview. All right. And then eventually that case settled, and Bill Cosby paid her, Ms. Constant, an undisclosed amount of money, probably millions of dollars. Okay. And Bruce Castor, who was the district attorney at the time and also one of Trump's impeachment attorneys, Bruce Castor was
Good
he
people just keep showing up everywhere, right?
right. So he kept his word, you could say, and did not pursue the criminal case. So couple of years go by, and because of all the allegations more allegations coming out against Cosby, media pressure is growing, political pressure is growing. The public and all the victims here are incensed because they want some justice from Bill Cosby. So Bruce Castor, and I don't know whether he was lost in an election or if his term was up, but he was out as Montgomery County District Attorney. A new district attorney came in whose name escapes me. This new district attorney said, we're going to move forward with this case. Now, one of the things that people said to me was, well, did this district attorney who came in do something wrong? My answer is no, because what happened with Cosby and Constant and Castor is sort of a very complicated legal scenario. And so this new DA, when he comes in, he was in a good faith attempt to enforce the criminal laws, brought this case against Bill Cosby, okay, under the color of law, I would say. Did you get his name, Brad?
Yeah, Kevin Steele. And this is a little something I heard on the opening arguments podcast, where it's pretty interesting because Kevin Steele was in this situation where, and there was this huge upswell against Cosby because of the Burris, Hannibal Burris, his comedy thing sort of reminded everyone about Cosby's behavior. The Me Too movement happens, and
Yeah.
Kevin Steele's like, "Hey, should I be filing charges?"
Yeah.
And it's sort of like my understanding as a layman was Castor said we're not going to prosecute, but that was like been presented as that was like a personal promise or a promise of him specifically that he wasn't going to get that civil testimony. But Steele was not, or at least from Steele's perspective, he was not beholden to that promise. Like it wasn't a promise that forever you will never be pressed charges. Just Castor saying, I'm not going to press charges, and Steele like saying, well, I am. And that's a lot of where the problems have come from, or why we're now in this situation.
The Supreme Court disagreed. They said, that they said it was a promise. And my understanding as well, again, I've read a couple of articles. I didn't go in depth on this, but they brought this issue up. The Cosby's attorneys brought this issue up during the trial, and the trial judge disagreed with Cosby's attorneys. They said no. So after the trial, when they were convicted, they and you have to raise an issue at trial in order to bring it up on appeal. So they preserved the issue properly, brought it up on appeal, and took it to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The thing here, I would say, it was a 78-page opinion, Brad. So maybe if we want to do a follow, if I can sit down, I just don't have the time to read that. I have so much other stuff I have to read. But more or less, it's what I know what the court said was it was a violation of due process. And due process is actually a bit of a strange thing in the law because it's the Constitution does not specifically mention due process, but the Supreme Court has said from all of the rights guaranteed by the Constitution that if you read into them enough, due process is guaranteed. And due process basically says that you have the right to a fair proceeding. Okay. And what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided, and yeah, when Steele came in, he was probably like, well, Bruce said this or that, but it wasn't an agreement that my office is beholden to. But the Supreme Court said no, that Castor made this promise as part of the Montgomery County District Attorney, as that office, more or less, and Cosby gave the testimony reliant on that promise. And that's actually important because from a contract perspective, like you only really have a contract if both parties get or give something. So, Castor gave up the right to prosecute, and Bill Cosby gave that testimony. Okay, and boom, then that's why it's a binding contract. That's why the Supreme Court is saying that he cannot that a new trial is not the correct remedy, right? He can no longer have a fair trial on this particular case because of the testimony he gave. And I think too that I would have to read the opinion, but it has a lot to do with the fact that Cosby then went out and incriminated himself, relying on the district attorney's promise. If there was like a promise, I don't know, that didn't involve like direct testimony from the person accused of the crime, then maybe the Supreme Court would have come down differently. But that's another right guaranteed by the Constitution, is the right to not incriminate yourself, right? The Fifth Amendment right to stay quiet, right? Everybody, I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth. Bill Cosby surrendered a fundamental right in order to, get the promise from the DA, a fundamental constitutional right to get the promise from the prosecutor, okay, that he would not prosecute.
Because
So
I
that,
remember the thing that surprised me so much when the trial was happening was that civil testimony being used against Cosby. And I'm like, how on earth is this in here? And I
yeah,
remember somebody saying, because people love Bill Cosby. And I remember somebody saying, "He's like, well, this is a he said, she said." I was like, have you listened to the testimony? It's
no,
Cosby against himself. It's a he said, he said. The things that he said in that civil testimony, and was so damning. I just couldn't believe that, and I was so surprised. And again, layman, I was like, how is this? How is this getting into court? Because I was like, I would just figure that if you're giving testimony that damning, there's no way in a civil testimony knowing about the Fifth Amendment. It's like there's no way you would give that without promises or understanding that, hey, this isn't going to be used against you. And it turns
yeah,
out that's a big reason why he's free right now, is because
yeah,
the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is like, yeah, you can't do that.
yep, that's it. That's sort of it in a nutshell. And it's excuse me, a lot of parties involved in this, and it's my opinion is, as a criminal defense attorney, I believe that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court got it right. Okay. And one of the problem, perhaps the biggest problem, is that the law was not clear on this when things were happening back in 2015, right? There was no good precedent for Bruce Castor or Andrea Constand's attorneys to rely on while all of this was going on. Because again, sometimes, number one, issues like this are rarely written into statutory law, okay, by the legislature. And issues like this only, we only get clear law on them whenever they go to the Superior Court or they go to the Supreme Court and then they issue an opinion. Um, there are instances. So I'll give you an example. Something that happens in court all the time is I'm a defense attorney. I sign with the district attorney what's called a tentative plea agreement. So we'll make agreements early on in the case, but they're specifically written so that either party can get out at any time. And generally, it's extremely difficult to to get a judge to hold the prosecution to their end of that bargain if they pull out. Extremely difficult. And that's why I think I'd have to look through the opinion. I always could do that and come back. But that's why I think the fact that he was actually giving Fifth Amendment testimony played so much of a role in the court's decision. Like, wow, the prosecutor came, said, well, we won't prosecute if you go ahead and incriminate yourself. And 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 he did. And that's why, again, that the court's saying there can't be a fair trial on this case any longer. Or that, the agreement is binding forever, like it's gone. Like you cannot prosecute. Like the DA said this, they got something big in return and poof, it's gone. Really, Castor was, I mean, a district attorney, Bruce Castor, back when this happened, he could have said to everybody involved, like F off, okay, or go kick the bucket, I'm going to prosecute. Right? He doesn't have to listen to Constand's attorneys. He doesn't have to listen to Cosby's attorneys. If he wants to prosecute on a case, he doesn't have to make a deal with anybody. District attorneys have a tremendous amount of discretionary power. So he was in a position where maybe he believed that he could help the victim get something that she wanted that perhaps was more important to her than the actual criminal prosecution. I mean, I would be interested to, well, we'll never know because this comes down to discussions between her and her lawyers, but like what they believed, when they walked away from that deal and then Cosby gave the testimony and then she got the money, like, were they under the impression that he could still be prosecuted? I find it hard to believe that they were, but I don't know.
Well, and yeah, and I'm sure there was those discussions in that consideration. It's like, okay, a terrible thing happened to this woman, and I listen from Cosby's own testimony in that civil trial. I think it's very hard to argue that something wretched did not happen to this woman. Again, like you, my memory's a little foggy because honestly, there were so many accusations against Cosby.
Sure.
But my understanding was that he was a sort of a family friend who took advantage of her,
Yeah.
and and but it becomes a thing. It's like, okay, what is the value of him going to jail to her at that point? Or okay, he can be punished by the pocketbook, and then she can get the therapy that's needed, get whatever help is needed, and also financially help her children, her family, and it's sometimes that people who take those sort of agreements are looked down upon. It's like, oh well, if uh, this athlete or this actor did such a horrible thing, why would you take the money and sign a non-disclosure? It's like, you know what? Money. We always want to pretend that we're above taking money over someone being thrown in jail, but knowing that you have the money to get the help you need. Because if Cosby just goes straight to jail and people can suffer emotional disturbance by what happened to her, you need help for that. Also, you know, knowing, hey, this terrible thing that happened to me is a terrible thing. I'm going to get help, and also I will know that my children will be able to attend college, and uh, those things. That's a real thing. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
America is money really works very well in America to help us move forward in life. So you understand it. Also knowing it wasn't a slam dunk case without that testimony.
Right. That too. That's a huge part of this.
So you're like, okay, well, what if what if they file criminal charges and he's acquitted? It's going to make, stop me if I'm wrong, it's going to make the civil trial more challenging, even though there is a different
Yes.
level but still, his lawyer's going to say, hey, well, the lawyer
Yep.
would say he's been declared innocent, even though that's not really what it is.
Yep.
I get it. And um, these are complicated things. And also, gosh, we all saw what happened with O.J. Simpson in the Nicole Simpson murder trial.
Yep.
The Little Rascals actor who allegedly killed his wife and got off. Uh, Fame helps you get away with stuff,
Sure.
and this is before the Me Too movement.
Yes.
So and it's Cosby. We all loved Bill Cosby.
Yes.
I I I,
Yes.
I got a few years on you, I think, Joe. But you've
Hmm.
seen reruns of the Cosby Show. He was America's dad.
Yeah, I watched them as a kid. I watched it. I was like 10 or so, and there were still some. Yeah, I watched them. Absolutely.
So going up against the rich guy who's beloved and America's dad, it's not like Charlie Sheen. It's not somebody who's sort of their reputation as being a
Yeah.
scumbag. It's this
Yes.
really likable guy who.
Yes.
Uh, so I get why you would take that deal if it was presented
Yeah.
to you,
Yep.
and I
I
know it
can.
makes it more difficult for everyone else to. I Stop me if I'm wrong. What can really help with something like this is having the more people that come forward, the more people that are able to testify can help a conviction or prosecution happen. That's why these people that's why people of means pay for the non-disclosure agreements and pay
Sure.
the millions of dollars to get out of these situations to keep these things from snowballing.
Sure. Well, here's the interesting thing apart about that is you're like, so there's rules of evidence, and there's a rule in Pennsylvania. Every state has it, every federal court, and it means that uh, evidence cannot be brought in against a defendant, okay, of prior bad acts, okay, unless there are certain exceptions. But the idea is, you let's say, for instance, let's take Bill Cosby out of it. You have somebody who was convicted of bank robbery twice in the past, and now they're on trial for bank robbery a third time. And the idea is that they can't get a fair trial if you tell the jury about the other two times that the person was convicted of a bank robbery. So that those things are generally not allowed in a trial. And as you may know here, Brad, the judge here sort of split the baby. He allowed one prior victim of Cosby's to testify, in addition to the victim who the case was actually about, but did not allow like a parade of women to come in and say that Cosby did this. And that's solely within the discretion of the trial judge. But prior bad acts are generally not allowed unless they fall into certain exceptions. Which I think is why the judge allowed one of them in, because one of the exceptions is what's called the modus operandi exception. So if a criminal has a certain, I can't think of the word, but a flavor
A
or
pattern.
a pattern, you got it, a certain pattern of what they do, you got it, Brett, then you can bring in that prior act if it followed that pattern. And apparently Cosby had a signature pattern here that he used. But also, what happens too is people, especially in a case like this, right? Like Cosby, when you weren't going to have a jury pool who hadn't already been tainted, right? So if the more women come forward, as long as it's getting out in the news, then and it spreads enough around the country, it's like I doubt anybody who sat in that jury had no or only thought that there was one or two accusations against him, right? If 60 accusations, then you're being tried in the court of public opinion, and then that can taint the jury. And with big national cases, judges just have to say, well, there's really nothing they can do about that, but they still have to have the trial. So there's ways to rehabilitate a person on the jury. You could say, well, are you able to set these things aside? Yes, I am. Are you able? Well, yeah, the person's going to say that, okay, but it doesn't actually mean that they can. And the information is still in their brain when they're sitting there watching. I mean, it takes a truly enlightened soul to like set aside these other bad things that they heard and just look at this particular case. And it's arguable that that's not even possible. Um, so that played a role here as well. As far as the non-disclosures, and like you said, with the money, and I think that overall the Me Too movement was a very positive thing in this country that happened. But one of the things that was, and I'm an attorney, and I've drafted NDAs, right? I've drafted NDAs. I have like 50 of them on my computer. Okay, is I think we should be careful about, like, there's like this fervor. It's like, oh, non-disclosure agreements are bad, bad, bad. Like that was part of the Me Too movement, or at least like a small element of it. And I'm sitting here as an attorney. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa! Like let's slow our roll here a little bit. Like, yeah, the Me Too movement is a very good movement, but I don't know if we should be bashing at non-disclosure agreements because of what you said, Brad. I mean, you nailed it. Like, what if Cosby, let's say this woman says, nope, I'm not making an agreement. Cosby goes to trial, wins, he's acquitted. Now she's lost any leverage that she has in order to get a financial settlement. And then Cosby went free and she's got $0 in her pocket. And I mean, nobody wins in that situation. And from the instance of a particular individual, Ms. Constant, it's like she knows what's best for her. And if she makes this choice, now, if she's making the choice in a way in which she's not informed, that's completely different. But if she understands, if a victim understands the consequences of signing the agreement, then I don't think it's a bad thing if there's good lawyers involved, etc. Another thing, this is me, but I think kind of what happens too is, and what happened in Me Too a couple of times, is like these women would sign an NDA, and then all this negative publicity would come out against the attacker, and then all of a sudden they start to have second thoughts, and it's like, well, you can't have that after the fact thought. It's like you signed an agreement. But I think a lot of that perhaps comes from social pressure. I mean, because it's in the newspaper, it's on TV, it's in the media. Everybody's saying, oh, you shouldn't have signed this NDA. This person's so bad, they need to go away. And then you, as the person who signed the NDA, the wheels might start to turn in your head like, oh, I wish I hadn't signed that, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's a very complicated thing, but NDAs,
Hindsight's 2020 because
right, right,
yeah, when you signed the NDA, the world was different.
right.
And
Yeah,
Harvey
yeah,
Weinstein is the real biggest and most famous case, even possibly even more than Cosby,
yeah,
because Harvey Weinstein was an unbelievably powerful person, unbelievably rich, who knew how to manipulate the media and had very powerful friends. So, yeah, it's very easy to say now, it's like, oh, you should have not signed that NDA and testified
right,
against Harvey Weinstein. It's like
right.
Harvey Weinstein destroyed careers easily.
Sure.
So you can, okay, go against one of the most powerful people in Hollywood who's like has Hillary Clinton on his speed dial and has Barack Obama's kids working for him. Yeah,
Yeah,
go up against that one when you're a struggling artist, struggling actress living in a like a one bedroom flat with three roommates in Hollywood. Yeah, that sounds great. And it's very
right.
easy now to say, hey, you should have gone against them. It's like, no, your career would have been destroyed. Now you got that, signed the NDA, you got the settlement, you were able to continue your career hopefully, and help get a living for yourself. So yeah,
Right.
it's and I understand the desire afterwards, like, oh, I wish I hadn't, I didn't, because you don't know how the world's going to change. But
Sure. Sure.
NDAs can be really important and they can be valuable to people, and they're not always an instrument for evil.
I
I
agree.
would say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And the most important thing, because I have no doubt that some of the people after the Me Too movement didn't truly understand what it meant when they were signing the NDA. I'm sure some of them, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have. They should have, and if they had attorneys. And I think that's really important, from the perspective of my profession, that lawyers need to really be clear about exactly what the person is giving up when they're signing the NDA, because people may just, they may, instead of reading the 78-page document, you know, they might say, "You're my attorney, give me the broad strokes," and the lawyer does that, and then they sign it, and then, even if it's in there, honestly, like, they may not have known. But it doesn't mean that what a court will say, though, is you signed it, you should have known, especially you had counsel, blah, 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 an opportunity to read, etc. So, yeah, I didn't know about a lot of these. See, the thing that I focused on was the prior bad acts part of this case, because that was highly publicized while the trial was going on, and I wasn't following it that closely. And um and so what a lot of attorneys were saying is, oh, it may get overturned because the judge allowed this one prior victim in. So that was another appealable issue in Cosby's case. But because the PA Supreme Court, they made a decision on the agreement around Castor, etc., they never got to that issue. But he might have been able to argue that issue as well.
Well, would that have been, and I think even the dissenting opinion on the case, that the dissenting even said is like, hey, I don't think we should have overturned on that. However, the other issue I might have agreed to.
Yeah.
But would that have been this sort of dismissal with an inability to refile, or would that have been a mistrial and they would have gone back to the drawing board?
That almost certainly would have been a new trial, a mistrial, and they would have remanded, granted the right to a new trial. Almost certainly. Almost certainly.
Were you surprised that they didn't give them the opportunity? Were you expecting there to be a retrial on this? Were you surprised that, or does this really make sense from a legal perspective?
I wasn't following closely enough, Brad, to even know that that issue was up by the Supreme Court. To be perfectly honest, when I first heard it, I thought it was on that prior bad acts, like the additional woman that they allowed to testify. And then I read it and I discussed it. So I'm in a couple of forums, like on Facebook and different social media, and it's just me and like a lot of different criminal defense attorneys, and we bounce ideas around. It's a really great resource. But we all discussed it. I can tell you the defense attorneys, and we're biased. Obviously, we defend people like Mr. Cosby, uh, but I think it was a good. I think it
Which
was
is
the
a
right
good thing.
decision. It,
I know lawyers get a bad thing. Bill Cosby should have legal representation. It's very important, because if Bill Cosby doesn't have legal representation, if he doesn't have lawyers going to bat for him, we're all screwed.
Look, if the court doesn't protect the right of one, they're not going to protect the rights of many. This decision just created new fundamental constitutional rights, more or less, or at least a newly discovered one, for every citizen of Pennsylvania. It's there's a couple of sayings. We can get into this more because I've had this discussion, because a lot of people have asked me about this, Brad. Is what some people say, and this is reasonable disagree, is it's better, it's worse to convict one innocent person, than to put 100 guilty people in jail, right? It's like, let 100 guilty people be free before you convict one innocent person. The whole is greater than the part. And here it's unfortunate that under these circumstances the court had to articulate this piece of due process, okay, that was not articulated in the past, because I think most people will agree, Cosby, like, he justice should probably see him in jail. I mean,
Oh, there's
or,
no reason he should be out hanging out. Good lord. And the first time when they announced he has a comedy show, my head's gonna explode. Because
well, let me go ahead. Sorry.
well, because there was even he was talking about how he wanted to do a tour to talk about, like, you know, I forget. I wish I could remember the exact term, but he wanted to like do some
Wrongful
sort of tour
convictions.
giving lessons about how to respect
Yeah.
women. It's like, who the hell are you? And that tour happens, brains will just explode from the hypocrisy because he doesn't think. I'm not a psychologist. I've not had any personal conversations with Bill Cosby. He doesn't. He really seems to believe he's innocent,
Yeah.
which is painful.
Yes.
Ugh.
Well, that's the important thing, is that, and it's already been distorted by the media, is that this decision by the Supreme Court is not it has nothing to do, it frankly has nothing to do with guilt or innocence. It has nothing to do. The Supreme Court did not say Bill Cosby is innocent. And in fact, a jury of his peers said that he is guilty. On top of that, his sentence was only like 3 to 10, and he had already done in like 3 years. He was up for parole in like less than a year, and
Right.
so he had already done some jail time over a year, I think close to 2 years or something. I'm not saying that that should be satisfactory, but some people might say he shouldn't have done any because his rights were violated. So it's not like he got away with, without losing a pound of flesh here. Um, he did do some jail time, and that happens a lot. Defendants will sit in jail for a year before their trial date, depending on their particular circumstances. And then if they win, they lost a year of their life. And so uh, this, but the media obviously, Bill Cosby's going to run. Of course, he's going to run with this and say that he's innocent. I mean, of course, he almost has to like go on with life. But that's not what it is.
Well, there was the Felicia Rashad has caught a lot of heat,
Yeah, yeah.
justifiably, because saying it's like, oh, a great wrong has been righted, but
Mm.
and very heavily implying it's like he was innocent the whole time, and now everyone addressed like,
Yeah,
no, 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 no one is saying. I believe the foreperson for that trial actually released a statement saying is like, no, we are very proud of our decision and we did the right thing, and no one is not guilty isn't innocent, and an overturned conviction doesn't mean oh he was such a great guy. And I can understand the idea that if god forbid if I were to be in some sort of similar situation, which I really hope that isn't in the cards, uh and we're told it's like, okay, we're not going to prosecute you as long as you testify in a civil trial, understanding that it's a promise. There we are. That has never, ever happened before in the history of this show. My computer just went blue screen of death. Is like, I, I, that isn't awesome. All right. So, as I was saying,
okay.
I understand it. It's frustrating that this person who's obviously done terrible stuff is out free. And I think we would all prefer that that wasn't the case. But it's something that can protect all of us because I understand why it happened.
Sure.
So yeah.
It
All right.
and let me just say a few things. Things can be done. So number one, I think you can't stress. We can't stress how I understand how difficult it is, and it needs to be made easier and less invasive. But victims of crimes need to come forward as soon as possible. Because it gives law enforcement and attorneys involved the most options to do something, and like you said, the world changed, and the world is different now. But I think that it's important to let's keep that in mind. Like, if we can come forward with things as fast as possible. The other thing too is it actually helps law enforcement because they can gather evidence before it's gone or before it's dissipated or hidden or who the heck knows. Also, I think that prosecutors, like the role Bruce Castor played, and look, it's such a tough call because he probably believed that he was helping this victim in a way, right? And again, it's like, what was her mindset at the time? What's her mindset now? Who knows? Maybe she regrets the decision. But I personally think that district attorneys should sort of stay out of civil proceedings like that. Okay, because they often see themselves as, and I know this from my personal experience, as representing the rights of the victim in the crime. And that's
Right.
part of their role, but their actual role, the real role, is to represent the entire society, right? They're enforcing the crimes in order to or criminal laws in order to benefit the whole society. And sometimes district attorneys make decisions contrary to the victim's will or what the victim wants, and they have the power to do that. So personally, I think that the role of a district attorney, that they should of course take victims' intents into account, but I think they should stay out of civil proceedings. Like, a civil proceeding should not impact what they do or don't do. They should make the decision based on what they think is right, etc.
Well, isn't that the and I always forget his name because I'm just I don't know because screw him. The director of Rosemary's Baby, who was accused of rape, um, and then fled the country, now lives in France because
Yeah,
he felt the judge was going to lay down a more stringent conviction than he was expecting. And the victim in that case, who was like 13 years old when he assaulted her, has said is like, "Oh, I don't think he should be convicted, or I don't think he should be tried anymore." And you understand where she's coming from because she just wants to move on from the thing. But
sure.
the prosecutors in the area is like, you know, that we can't let that decide whether or not this person who fled from justice and has lived a great life in France, we can't let what this victim wants sadly be the deciding factor in whether or not we move forward. I'm just making myself crazy. His wife was killed by the Manson family. Uh,
I'm not
yeah.
familiar with that one. But
Rosemary Baby.
and look, it's a tough call. It really, really is, because on one hand, you can look at the Cosby situation. You can say, look, she ended up with a lot of money, and like you said, there's something to be said for the victim moving forward. And if for years and years of litigation or criminal litigation can make that more difficult. So there's something to be said for that as well. And she ended up with money. So it can be hard to criticize it, but personally, I think a victim's wishes should be taken into account for a district attorney. I understand that. I do think that they should steer clear of negotiating when it comes to civil cases or being involved in civil negotiations. That's just my personal thought with it. They can still do things to help a victim, but getting involved in like the other litigation, I don't know. I think it's just a little too much. But
Roman Polanski was his name. Roman Polanski
yeah,
is the
yeah, yeah,
director.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
He gets to hang out in France and do movies with Harrison Ford and stuff. It's I get it. Like he's lived a great life overseas, so. And of course, I think the thing was he was nominated for an Oscar and he can't come back to the states because as soon as he steps off the
Yeah,
plane, he'll be.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
All right. So, Joe, it's been great talking with you. But you're the sovereign citizen guy. You know your stuff about sovereign citizen. And after we set up to have this call, more citizens got themselves in the news because they got uh not I-95, which is the worst road anyway.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
You got to walk our listeners through this because it's a fascinating story and it's in your wheelhouse, man.
Yeah, it's right in my wheelhouse. So hopefully listeners are aware of sovereign citizens. They're a loosely based group of people, frankly, all over the country, all over the world now, who believe for one reason or another that the United States government is not legitimate, that the laws don't apply to them. There's all kinds of theories, right? And there's different groups and different theories within, and there's a group called we'll call them Moorish sovereign citizens who believe that they are actually citizens of Morocco, and there was a treaty between Morocco and the United States in the late 1800s. They believe it gives them diplomatic immunity, also that they were here before the United States government. Okay, so we have this group of people, Moorish sovereign citizens, don't believe U.S. laws apply to them, also believe they were here basically before Europeans. Therefore, the United States government, which was set up by Europeans, is not legitimate. All right. There's this particular group subset of sovereign citizens, more sovereign citizens. Then this guy who runs a YouTube channel called Rise of the Moors. Okay, I've covered this. The first time I watched one of his videos, Brad, he was talking about recruiting an army. He was like, well, there's no point in doing any of this unless we have an army, and we have guns. So, what happens over the weekend is this guy who Rise of the Moors runs this YouTube channel. Him and 10 other dudes were driving from I'm not sure where he's based, but they were going to Maine to do military training exercises. They ran out of gas on the side of the road. There were two cars. They got out to help each other, and the state police drive by and see these two cars broken down. The guys are dressed up like soldiers with combat helmets and camo and flak vests on and guns. They all were armed. And my understanding is every one of them was armed. So the
An
police,
elite fighting force that forgot gas.
right? So the police, I don't know exactly how it went down, but the police it confronted them. I believe two of them were arrested right away. Two of them holed up in one of the vehicles, and the rest of them ended up in the woods. And there was an 8-hour armed standoff between the police and Rise of the Moors.
And God, traffic must have been shut down. And I live in Pennsylvania, right across the border from Maryland. I've dealt with 95 my
Oh
entire
yeah.
life. I've spent a lot of hours just sitting parked on 95, and I just can't imagine those poor people in Massachusetts. And this is a holiday weekend, and they just want to go where they're going.
Yes.
And you have these guys, and they were on the news, and they had all the accoutrement and all the signage in their cars and all the I'm just traveling, I'm not driving.
No
And
driver's licenses. No licenses for the guns either.
and it's just and I watched this is like we already had scheduled to talk, or we were getting ready to schedule to talk. I was like, oh my god, and I'm gonna be talking to Joe.
We could do a whole nother episode on that.
All other episode talking about and it's just and it's funny, but you realize in so many levels that it's not. And Joe, you literally wrote the book, and it's right next to you. You wrote the book on sovereign citizens, which I've read, and it's excellent.
Thanks.
And
Thank you.
you have your stuff, but you're a good writer, and you are able to convey it to a layman, and you have sympathy for these people, which is something that you and I have talked about before, because there's a
Sure.
lot of people who have great YouTube shows about sovereign citizens, and it's usually mocking. Um, but don't get me wrong, that's plenty deserved, and you're not above having a laugh at this. But you do, because you're a lawyer, you do take about, it's like, this is what they think, and this is what the actual law is, and understanding that while a lot of it's funny, and the guy who shows up at court wearing like a headdress and having a staff, thinking that somehow, and if he doesn't cross the bar, that doesn't mean they don't have authority and all that.
Yeah.
And it's funny, but you understand, first off, some of these people are desperate.
Sure.
Some of these people are mentally ill. And sadly, some of these people are dangerous.
Yes.
And we're having a laugh because it's funny. It's like 95 gets shut down in Massachusetts because these guys are, but there was firearms in their vehicles that they were transporting,
Yes.
and they're running into a wooded area. That's dangerous.
Yes.
And so, when you see this, first off, you're gonna be like, well, I have like several episodes of your show set up for this.
Yes.
Uh, uh, is Now, there does seem to be a thing with more. Also, I've just the range of sovereign citizens is so vast,
Oh yeah.
because you have basically white supremacists on one end,
Yes.
and then Moorish citizens, sort of like black supremacists, because I can't think of a better term, on the other. It's like, how are they all under the same umbrella?
It's truly bizarre, Brad. They, what I wrote a book, I read a lot, I've watched these videos. The sovereign citizen movement, I think we talked about last time, grew out of sort of like white nationalists in the 1970s out in the Midwest who were very opposed to taxes and really, really serious into Christianity, right? And they come up with these weird tactics and this whole language, right? There's a whole lexicon for the sovereign citizen movement. And what's happened is since the 1970s, and the Moors, and I don't know what to call them necessarily either. Maybe I don't even know if black nationalists would be the right word. Something like that. It's more like it's hard to define. But there was the Moorish temple, right? The Moorish Science Temple that was founded in the early 1900s, which was like this movement for. I think it's sort of like almost like a black pride movement in a way. And that Moorish Science Temple, I don't really see any harm in that as it is, though they do hold these beliefs that there was this treaty between the United States and Morocco, and that they come from maybe a place that they don't actually come from over in Africa or the Middle East. So 1970s, you get into the 80s, and what you see is this melding, right, of the language, the some of the people, I guess, in the Moorish Science Temple decided to adopt this language that they saw these white nationalists using and adopt it to their own theory, and combined, right? In religion, they call it syncretism, right? Like the combination of two religions. And I'm because I lived in Japan for a lot. Japan is really cool. It's like they have their native religion, Shinto, and then they have Buddhism, and it sort of like overlaps in a lot of ways. But that's what happened here. Like these two ideologies formed. The thing with sovereign citizenship, the sovereign citizen theories, those it can map on to like almost any type of conspiracy theory. So, QAnon, which is like a new movement in the last couple of years, there's QAnon sovereign citizens. Like I've seen people arrested. I'm reading these articles on people arrested, and they're saying, oh, well, QAnon told me to do this, that, and this. And then they move into sovereign citizen language. Oh, well, the court doesn't actually have jurisdiction over me and the laws. And so sovereign citizen language in the movement can it mapped onto this Moorish national temple. It mapped onto QAnon. It can map onto all these other different sort of like anti-government theories very, very easily because you can just pick different parts of it. And it's like, and honestly, that's what I think makes it inherently very dangerous. And it is funny. It certainly is, and we laugh, and I mock them to a certain degree. And I have sympathy for some of the people in it because they're dealing with ridiculous circumstances or their license has been suspended, and I lean libertarian in a lot of ways, so I'm like, fight the government as well.
You can understand someone who they can't get a driver's license, but they
Right,
still need to make a living,
right.
and they're basically becoming broke. They're broke, and they're running out of options. It's almost like a Hail Mary. It's like, honestly,
Yeah,
these are lives that are destroyed,
yeah,
maybe because of their own, doing, maybe not all 100%. So you can understand them going for a Hail Mary.
sure.
Um, so yeah, but desperate people also can be dangerous as well.
Yes. This group, Brad, when I first covered them about a year, I've done like so the lead dude, his name's Jamal. I've watched, I think I did two or maybe three videos on him, but I've watched a lot of his videos. And what I think, and when I did a year ago, I did a video where when he was, I thought he was dangerous right away because
Mm.
most of the sovereign citizens do not talk about weapons and guns. Okay. Most of them, a lot of them, it's like this don't tread on me type thing. Like they're pretty much harmless if they never come in contact with the police or the courts, then they're going to be harmless. But Jamal was like extremely active, like recruiting people, running meetings. He had like this quasi temple room set up, posting videos constantly, and then talking about getting guns, talking about using force. And I made the video a year ago, and I said, the FBI should be watching these people. Like this is like militia type thing, it's like it can happen. There's white nationalists that are dangerous. There's all kinds of groups that are dangerous in this country. Well, this is probably one that we should be watching. So it is funny. Let's be thankful that nothing happened. I don't think these guys, but one person pulls the trigger, goes the wrong way. Who knows? I'm just glad that this was de-escalated.
We're in a world of George Floyd. So there's so many different things going on, and the stress levels,
Yes.
and if there's one cop who's had too much caffeine or is scared,
Yes.
rightfully,
Yes.
I would be scared if I was in that situation. If I
Yeah.
came across two cars filled with weapons and guys in paramilitary gear. And on the other side, if I was one of these sovereign Morris citizens, I'd be nervous, and people can get trigger happy and the wrong thing can escalate. And if somebody had run into the woods and God forbid, heck, we're real close to, at this point, they were real close to 4th of July weekend. If a firework went off at the wrong time,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
misunderstandings happen, and that's how firefights. And that can, and listen, I'm from outside of Philadelphia. I remember Move. I remember, John
Yeah.
Africa and all that stuff.
That stuff's crazy.
And
I didn't know about
yeah,
that until I got into this.
yeah. So, and then, so again, we're having a laugh. Everyone was okay. So it was okay to have a laugh. It's okay to say, oh my God, poor people in Massachusetts were stuck in traffic for 3 hours or however long it was.
Yeah.
But it very could easily have turned
Yeah.
and gone a different direction where we're having a very serious conversation. So,
Yes.
geez. But it was just amazing that this happened. It was in the news, and it's like, I'm talking to Joe.
The timing was perfect, Brad. The timing was perfect.
And I stand by my statement. I've watched a lot of, and there's half dozen to a dozen channels set up about sovereign citizens.
Mhm.
And I stand by my statement that yours is the best.
Oh,
Yours has the, because, first off, you know how to edit. You give such great legal expertise. And then, now you changed your name for a while. because it went back to the Common Sense Academy. You changed your name for a while, but went back. I guess first ideas are the best ideas.
Yeah, I didn't think that the new name was too long. I wanted to use something that described my actual content, like attorney audits, agitators. And there's the whole like audit, there's this whole auditing thing on YouTube where like there's the First Amendment auditors, and then there's I don't know if have you ever seen the show Audit the Audit on YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great channel actually, and that guy, he breaks down police, issues with police, and like so I was trying to grab onto that, but I just decided the name was too long, and people were coming back to me and saying, I don't know, I'm not a marketing genius by any means, so I just
You're
said,
a lawyer.
I
You have a
right,
full-time job.
right. So I said, look, I already built some brand credibility with the old name. So I'm going back, whether it's the best name it could have been, it was the name from the beginning. So yeah, I went back.
And you have your second. You also have the Joe the Lawyer pay. Yeah, this is a good time to plug your pluggables, because there's Common Sense Academy. There's your excellent book, Sovereign Citizens. But plug your pluggables, because you also have the Joe the Lawyer page,
Yeah,
right?
another page, Joe the Lawyer, where that's where I broke down like my thoughts on Bill Cosby, okay, or other legal issues in the news. And then I actually started a third, which is called Tips from a Lawyer, where I'm going to give practical tips on dealing with things like getting a speeding ticket, an issue with a contractor at your house. I just have I get all this legal knowledge bouncing around in my head, and I can share it. Now, it's not legal advice, but it is information people can rely on. I'm a lawyer. I gotta put the disclaimer. But yeah,
Don't take legal advice from a podcast or a YouTube
yes,
page, for God's sake.
Brad. Thank you. But Common Sense Academy, Joe the Lawyer, and/or Tips from a Lawyer, and on any one of those channels, you can find the links to my other channel.
Joe, this has been amazing. It's been a little while since we talked, but
Yes,
I always follow your pages,
thank
and you're a great guest. And it was funny. It was just so cool. It's tragic that Bill Cosby's out of jail, because I think most people would agree that he deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life. But I was like, oh man, I don't have the wherewithal to intelligently speak. I was like, wait a minute, I haven't talked to Joe for a while. We need to have him back. So I'm so glad to have you back, and we're gonna do this. I mean, hopefully we won't have as crappy a reason to bring you back as this, but we're gonna have you back. It's always great to have you on, and thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me, Brad, and I would love to come back. Maybe come on my show next time.
Hey, whenever you need somebody to just make smart ass comments and talk about.
You know what we should do is we should watch some Sovereign Citizen videos together.
Oh, I would love that. That'd be so much fun.
All right, we're gonna do that. That'd be better on my channel, but that's fine. We can do it.
I'll be there. I'll be on your channel anytime. This has been awesome.
All right, let's do it, Brad.